We're doing purple lighting today for, red, blue. When you mix it together, you get purple. Color Theory 101. But yeah, I was gonna do like red, but I want to do red for when I do like a vampire video, so saving red. Today we're talking about the similarities between Macbeth and Anakin. I just watched the prequel trilogy and I got all my information together. So yeah, we're going to be dissecting it a little bit more today. So hello and welcome, or welcome back to my channel. Before I begin, don't forget to like and subscribe. I tried to say that more when I first started my YouTube channel and I've forgotten to say that more regularly. So yeah, don't forget to like and subscribe.
Joseph Campbell said that all the great myths, the primitive myths, the great stories have to be regenerated if they're going to have any impact, and that you had done that with Star Wars. Are you conscious of doing that? Are you saying, I am trying to recreate the myths of old? Or are you saying, I just want to make a good action movie?
Well, when I did Star Wars, I consciously set about to recreate myths and the classic mythological motifs. And I wanted to use those motifs to deal with issues that existed today.
There will be spoilers for the prequel Star Wars trilogy, the Star Wars original trilogy, and Shakespeare's Macbeth. So be warned. There's this idea that was presented by Thomas Foster in How to Read Literature Like a Professor, that there is one universal narrative, i.e. the one story idea. This isn't to say that there is literally only one story, but that as humans, we share similar experiences. The one story idea also helps to understand the concept of intertextuality. And this idea was posed by 1960s critic Julia Kristeva. So intertextuality is the idea that all literature is derivative and other works of literature are constantly influencing other works of literature. Literary devices such as allegories and allusions make intertextuality clearer, but sometimes the influences aren't as apparent unless you really look at a story or are aware of some of the older works of literature or just general common tropes and story elements. So if I had not read Macbeth around the time that I was learning about Anakin and his story, I would not have made the connection. Obviously, it's just because I was reading Macbeth at the time. The more you read, you do start to find, connections like this because you have more of a, what do you call it? What's the word? I can't think of a word, but you have a sort of archive in your brain for things like this, and so you can start pointing it out more. Obviously, Star Wars is a movie, Macbeth is a play, but I think that movies can be included in this whole intertextuality conversation because movies are their own form of literature, sort of. It's a visual medium, but if we can include Shakespeare's plays, I think we can include movies because movies tell stories, obviously, again in a visual medium, but most of their literary devices are visual as well because it's a visual medium. Drink, every time I said visual within those couple of seconds, I said it like 3 or 4 times. So George Lucas was a fan of Joseph Campbell, who wrote a book called The Hero with 1,000 Faces. It was published in 1949, and in this book, Campbell argued that all ancient mythology tells one core story. And this further highlights the whole one story idea and the idea of intertextuality, that there is one central story and that all other works are a product of this universal narrative. Greek mythology, literature, art, poetry, etc. has been extremely influential. I would say the original Star Wars trilogy deals with the hero's journey much better. The prequel trilogy more so deals with the tragic hero trope, as does Shakespeare's Macbeth. What exactly is the tragic hero trope? The tragic hero trope was, I don't know if it was first seen in Greek literature, but as in terms of where you see it a lot, Greek literature, and where a lot of people in the West, a lot of Western writers, Shakespeare, where they got their inspiration from? Greek literature. I actually learned a little bit about this when I took my, what was it? It was a theories class. We talked about this a little bit, but not super in depth. We were just going through kind of like the history of literary criticism and theory. Poetics is Aristotle's analyzation of drama as well as performative arts. He wanted to defend performative arts and assert that it was a legitimate form of art. I could provide a link to Aristotle's Poetics down there somewhere, so you can read it all for yourself if you would like to. It's not very long. Regarding the tragic hero trope, Aristotle wrote, "The change of fortune presented must not be the spectacle of a virtuous man brought from prosperity to adversity. For this moves neither pity nor fear. It merely shocks us, nor again that of a bad man passing from adversity to prosperity. For nothing can be more alien to the spirit of tragedy. It possesses no single tragic quality. It neither satisfies the moral sense nor calls forth pity or fear. Nor again should the downfall of the utter villain be exhibited. A plot of this kind would, doubtless, satisfy the moral sense, but it would inspire neither pity nor fear. For pity is aroused by unmerited misfortune, fear by the misfortune of a man like ourselves. Such an event, therefore, will be neither pitiful nor terrible. There remains, then, the character between these two extremes, that of a man who is not eminently good and just, yet whose misfortune is brought about not by vice or depravity, but by some error or frailty. He must be one who is highly renowned and prosperous." So for Aristotle, the tragic hero must elicit pity, and you don't do that just by taking somebody who was once good and just making them bad. You know, just they wake up one day and then they're evil. It's about what happens to the hero and the misfortunes that they experience to get them to where they end up. It's also supposed to make us, the reader or the viewer, feel like it's something that could happen to us, and so we are fearful of it. So for example, Anakin's first morally dubious act is when he murders the Sand People or the Tusken Raiders. I've seen many people say, well, if that was my mom, I would have done the same thing. We are supposed to sympathize, pity even, Anakin in this moment, because after leaving his mother for 10 years, she is kidnapped, brutally tortured, and dies. Not only is Anakin rightfully upset, but he also is dealing with the guilt of not being around to help his mother. Anakin's act of revenge is supposed to make us question what we would do in such a situation if someone ever harmed someone we cared about. But the action of slaughtering those people was not the Jedi way, so already we start seeing Anakin move away from the Jedi way of thinking. And in reality, the concept of revenge, you know, a lot of people think that they would jump at the chance of revenge, but I don't think people realize how that truly takes a toll on the human soul. For Macbeth, he was a good person. He was a noble and well respected, but his ambition to become king led to his downfall. But we can feel pity for him because he was good, and the murder of King Duncan, which sent him on a spiral downward, wasn't completely of his own volition. He was being pressured and goaded by Lady Macbeth. Macbeth and Anakin are both tragic heroes. I think that an argument can be made that once Anakin becomes Darth Vader, we'd probably call him more like a sympathetic villain, but once he saves Luke, he's returned back to his tragic hero status. Okay, so just so that we're all on the same page, I will give a background for each character, summarize their stories a little bit so nobody's confused. Macbeth is the titular character and main character for William Shakespeare's Macbeth. The Shakespearean tragedy takes some inspiration from the real-life Macbeth, who was the King of Scots from 1040 until his death in 1057. Even though it does take inspiration from this real-life person, it's not very historically accurate. Shakespeare's depiction of Macbeth in the play is actually a rather unfavorable one. but that in part has to do with the king at the time. King James claimed ancestry from Banquo, actually. I would say there's a lot of appeasing of King James in this play, a little bit of an ego boost. So Macbeth starts as a brave soldier. He gets awarded the title Thane of Cawdor, which was a prediction from 3 witches that came true. So when they also tell him that he will become king, Macbeth is motivated to murder King Duncan. Obviously, Macbeth is not an heir to the throne. He's not one of Duncan's sons, but Duncan's heirs flee Scotland because they're scared that they will also be killed. With them gone and people assuming that they were responsible for Duncan's death, Macbeth is crowned and declared King of Scotland. However, his short reign is not smooth sailing at all. Macbeth is paranoid and insecure about his position as king, while a rebellion is being planned in England for Malcolm to take his rightful place on the throne. I didn't make a note of this. I was thinking about it and I didn't really want to go super deep into it because I haven't seen the original trilogy, but I would say that the rebellion being planned in England, but the rebellion being planned is kind of similar to like the rebellion in Star Wars. It's just like another happy coincidence. But yeah, just like one more little similarity. The events of Macbeth while he's king, it's kind of like a pressure cooker situation and the lid is just waiting to fly off. The guilt of murdering King Duncan weighs on Lady Macbeth's mind, and it's implied that she dies by suicide. Macbeth's mental state has spiraled so much that her death isn't really given much thought. He laments about how he's alone now, but he's still determined to defend his kingship, his crown. Like he's, willing to die trying, and it ends in his beheading. And then at the end, Malcolm is on the throne, his rightful place. For Anakin's story, the Star Wars franchise began in 1977 with George Lucas's A New Hope. It wasn't titled that upon its release. It received that title, I believe, in 1981. I looked it up on Google and that's what it said. But A New Hope plus the following 2 films in that trilogy would eventually serve as a essentially follow-up story to Darth Vader Anakin Skywalker story, which was more fleshed out in the late 90s and early 2000s with the prequel trilogy. So as we all know in the original Star Wars trilogy, now we all know, and now I know too. Well, I'm gonna learn eventually more when I actually watch the original movies. But in the Star Wars trilogy, the original Star Wars trilogy, Darth Vader is the immensely powerful Sith Lord who serves the Galactic Empire. For the most part, I understand that Darth Vader's identity wasn't revealed until the Empire Strikes Back, and that's where we get the famous, the famous line,
"I am your father."
Darth Vader wanted Luke to join his side, join the dark side in episode 5. In Return of the Jedi, Darth Vader redeems himself by saving his son, and afterwards he dies peacefully as a hero, tragic hero. So the prequel trilogy gives a deeper look into Anakin's life and provides a reasoning for his turn to the dark side. We see that he was a slave, he lost his mother, he lost Qui-Gon, and he just relatively had a difficult life. He needed a parent, and he didn't have one. In the absence of a parent, Palpatine basically groomed Anakin into joining the dark side. Anakin, like Macbeth, was known as a brave fighter, and he was a good person. He had red flags, for sure. But with proper guidance, perhaps Anakin wouldn't have gone down the path that he went, and perhaps he would have eventually learned the error in his thinking. Either way, Palpatine successfully planted seeds of distrust in Anakin, which made him doubt the Jedi. In Revenge of the Sith, Anakin finally turns to the dark side when he believes that Padmé is in danger because he's having visions of her dying in childbirth, and he is desperately trying to find a way to save her. So I'm unsure about the reason, but I heard that Palpatine was the one that was putting the visions of Padmé dying in childbirth, like she never was going to die in childbirth. By doing that, because the Jedi weren't particularly helpful with the visions that Anakin was having. You know, they were just like, well, she dies, she dies. You're gonna have to learn to get over it. Obviously for Anakin, that wasn't good enough, and the Sith, the dark side, was a promising path because possibly he could save Padmé. Essentially what becomes an attempt to save Padmé's life ends up making Anakin a tool for Palpatine, and Padmé just dies anyway. By the end of Revenge of the Sith, after a battle with Obi-Wan, Anakin is nearly fatally injured. He must don the Darth Vader suit to sustain his life. Once Anakin puts on the Darth Vader suit, Anakin is metaphorically dead, and Darth Vader has come to life. So I will be going through trying to sort of organize this by going through each film and pointing out the similarities I found in each with the story of Macbeth. On a surface level, it can be said that both characters are arrogant, power hungry, and susceptible to other people's influences. But this is an analysis, so we are going to go deeper than that, of course. There will be some differences because the two characters are, after all, two different characters, so I'll point out the differences that I find, but this is mainly a similarity, a comparison. The Phantom Menace has the biggest differences primarily because Anakin is young in that he is 9, and with Macbeth, we meet Macbeth as an adult, and I think the play happens within a year, and he's an adult when he dies eventually, obviously. That's a major difference. And by meeting Anakin as a child in The Phantom Menace, we see him before he eventually goes down the wrong path, and we see him as a kind young boy and a boy who wants to help people. We don't see Macbeth really who he was before he was king. There's a lot of implication that people respect him and that he's brave. The events of murdering King Duncan happen very, very quickly, so we don't really spend a lot of time with Macbeth pre-murder. So yeah, that's a major difference. Not focusing on Macbeth's goodness so much really plays into the idea that Shakespeare was purposefully and decisively trying to depict Macbeth in a bad light. And I didn't make a note about this either. I should have. But Macbeth was a king, a real life king, but obviously Shakespeare took a lot of liberties, and I think essentially to show that this person was not right as king. And the person who King James is, and because he was a descendant of Banquo and stuff, King James is the rightful king. There, that's my note. The only similarity to Macbeth that I found in The Phantom Menace was the prophecy that was presented, but it's a very, very crucial element. The prophecies are such vital components to each story because they tell the reader and the viewer what exactly is going to happen to these two characters. Macbeth has multiple prophecies, meanwhile Anakin really only has one, and it was a prophecy that had existed before the Jedi knew of Anakin, but once they met him, they realized that he was the chosen one. So it is in scene 3 of Act 1 that the 3 witches, or weird sisters, encounter Macbeth walking and talking with Banquo. When Banquo sees the witches, he says, "What are these, so withered and so wild in their attire, that look not like the inhabitants of the earth and yet are on it?" In other words, Banquo already doesn't trust these 3 women. He thinks that they seem odd and just finds them odd. Like, they look weird. They're weird to him. So the witches then greet Macbeth, and the first witch says, "All hail Macbeth, hail to thee, Thane of Glamis." The second witch says, "All hail Macbeth, hail to thee, Thane of Cawdor." And then the third says, "All hail Macbeth, thou shalt be king hereafter." Macbeth was Thane of Glamis, but not Thane of Cawdor yet, and not king obviously yet. But somebody informs him that he is now Thane of Cawdor because the previous Thane of Cawdor had been tried and executed for treason. And so they were like, "You're Thane of Cawdor now." And Macbeth is like, that's super cool. So that means that the witches were right and I'm going to become king. But what's important is after the witches give this prophecy to Macbeth, though, Banquo says to Macbeth, "Good sir, why do you start and seem to fear?" That line tells the reader, if you're not physically watching the play and seeing the actor's reaction, that when Macbeth hears these prophecies, he's frightened by something, like something startles him. But what is he so frightened of? Basically, the source of Macbeth's fear has to do with the fact that he immediately acknowledges mentally that he's going to have to kill the king if he's going to become king, because he's not the heir to the throne. There's no possible way for him to become king. The only way is for him to kill the king and or kill his heirs. So this fear is not only the fact that he acknowledges that he's gonna have to kill the king, but it also shows that he takes the witches' prophecies seriously and takes what they say to heart, which is not something that he should have done. Macbeth's fear is highlighted by a reaction that Banquo has to a prophecy that the witches give him. The witches tell Banquo that he will have children who will become kings and their children will become kings. He won't become king, but his descendants will. When Macbeth thinks that he's on his way to becoming king and thinks that it's like pretty much solidified, he then asks Banquo, like, well, how do you feel about the fact that your kids are going to become kings? In response to Macbeth, Banquo says, "The instruments of darkness tell us truths, win us with honest trifles to betray us." So basically Banquo was like, yeah, the witches probably told you something that was going to become true or something that could easily have happened, but you shouldn't follow everything that they say. They're obviously witches and following them and their guidance is not a good idea. And he was right. Macbeth, however, takes the prophecy seriously still, and he sends a letter to Lady Macbeth, his wife, who gets riled up. Lady Macbeth wants the power, but she also wants to have a reason to respect her husband. Lady Macbeth really, really wants her husband to become king, and he does, but it is not a great time. Macbeth's reign as king is not without distrust. His short 1-year reign, he's paranoid because remember Banquo's prophecy that I said the witches gave to him? Because of this, Macbeth thinks that Banquo and his son are threats to him. So he orders them to be killed. Banquo is murdered, but his son Fleance is able to flee, and the son, Fleance, he's never mentioned again. We don't see any other children of Banquo. But taking historical context of the time when Shakespeare wrote this play and considering King James claimed descent from Banquo, it can be rationalized that this was Shakespeare's way of saying that Fleance must have come back eventually because King James ended up being King of Scotland. The prophecies of the witches caused Macbeth not only to murder the former king, but to kill his best friend. So what does he do? He goes back to the witches and he asks for more prophecies because very clearly he is making amazing decisions based on their prophecies. Act 4, Scene 1 is the scene where the witches conjure different apparitions that give Macbeth predictions. The first apparition is an armed head. The first apparition says, "Macbeth, Macbeth, Macbeth, beware Macduff. Beware the Thane of Fife, dismiss me enough." The second apparition is of a bloody child. The second apparition says, "Macbeth, Macbeth, Macbeth. Be bloody, bold, and resolute. Laugh to scorn the power of man, for none of woman born shall harm Macbeth." And then the third apparition is a child crowned with a tree in his hand, and Macbeth asks, "What is this?" The witches tell Macbeth that he will never be defeated unless Great Burnham Forest moves to Dunsinane Hill. The final apparition is a procession of 8 kings, where the 8th king, followed by Banquo's ghost, holds a mirror, and in that mirror, Banquo's seemingly endless future descendants are shown. The final apparition can be viewed as sort of irrelevant in the grand scheme of the play, and it's kind of can be seen more as more glorifying of King James, but this display of Banquo's descendants sort of mocks Macbeth, who is childless. He has no children, and he possibly has an inability to produce children, yet Banquo is expected to have this like super long fruitful line. And in this way, this apparition ultimately shows that Macbeth's reign was, even if he went unchallenged by anybody, would end with him. And that's not typical for a monarch. Monarchs are expected to have heirs so that the crown can pass easily and to a legitimate heir. But back to the other three apparitions, the most important ones, basically tell us that Macbeth is doomed. He doesn't think so, but they're spelling out exactly what is going to happen to him. First apparition is of an armed head. The first apparition essentially predicted Macbeth's beheading at the hands of Macduff. The second apparition is of a bloody child, and this apparition tells Macbeth that no man born of a woman should kill him. This apparition represents Macduff, who was born by way of cesarean section and not through the birth canal. We love loopholes. The third apparition is of a child crowned, holding a tree in hand, and the witches told Macbeth that the forest has to basically move. If the forest doesn't move, he's safe. If Macbeth thinks he's indestructible with the second apparition, by the third apparition he's fully convinced that nobody's challenging him ever. Later in the play, when the rebellion comes to challenge Macbeth, they use leaves from the forest to conceal themselves. So technically the forest is moving. So these prophecies were never meant to tell Macbeth that he was going to succeed, but rather they could be seen more as like warnings, but he didn't see that like that. We know that Anakin is the chosen one because he was born of no father. However, the prequels are showing us how Anakin became Darth Vader. So the original Star Wars movies have been out for decades now, and it's well-known information that Darth Vader does eventually redeem himself in Return of the Jedi, but obviously the characters of the prequels don't know that. So Revenge of the Sith ends with Anakin not fulfilling the prophecy. I have not seen the original Star Wars. I've seen bits and pieces, but I know the general Darth Vader story. The prophecy foretells the destruction of the Sith, but Anakin defies expectation by joining the Sith. However, in Return of the Jedi, Anakin ultimately fulfills the prophecy by killing Palpatine and then dying himself because of the electrocution from the Force lightning. In my opinion, and this could be wrong, I'll accept it, but my interpretation is that the prophecy is foretelling Anakin's demise. The prophecy states that through the Chosen One, balance will be restored to the Force. I believe that means that through Darth Vader's sacrifice and death, not necessarily Palpatine's death, balance is restored. The grown-up Anakin is first introduced in the elevator with Obi-Wan. Anakin tells Obi-Wan that he's the closest thing he has to a father. Qui-Gon was actually supposed to be the father figure for Anakin, and of course he died. Anakin and Obi-Wan's relationship is more brotherly than like a father-son relationship. Obi-Wan is considerably older than Anakin. It's at least a 16-year age gap, but Obi-Wan doesn't have that nurturing parental role in Anakin's life. Anakin doesn't really respect him the way that a son or a child would respect their father or parent. Not like he doesn't respect him, but he's, it's more of a brotherly thing. Like, they joke around and stuff and can tease each other, but they banter and they talk with each other like comrades, people who have fought together because they have, and that's very similar to Macbeth and Banquo's relationship. It's very obvious that Macbeth and Banquo are close and that they've fought together a number of times. Yet when Macbeth feels threatened by Banquo, he orders his murder. It's cold-hearted, especially because he orders the murder of Banquo's son as well. Macbeth's murder of King Duncan can be seen as like a power move, because that happened a lot, in medieval times and stuff. When there's kings and queens, people murdered and did bad things to get power. But when Macbeth targeted his best friend, that's, I think, truly the turning point for his character. The existence of Banquo and how Macbeth feels threatened by him is similar to how Anakin feels, or Darth Vader feels, threatened by Obi-Wan's existence. In between the events of Revenge of the Sith and A New Hope, Obi-Wan is on the run. After the whole execute Order 66 thing, Darth Vader still hunts down Jedi to get rid of them. Obi-Wan's existence is a threat to Darth Vader, it's a threat to the Sith. Again, like how Banquo's existence was a threat to Macbeth, Obi-Wan was a threat to Darth Vader's goals and his want and need for power and control. Banquo also tries to be sort of a voice of reason for Macbeth. Like I said earlier, he did try to warn Macbeth against trusting the witches. Macbeth just didn't pay them any mind. He was like, I'm gonna be king. Awesome. Obi-Wan does try to be Anakin's voice of reason, but it's far too late. At least Banquo tried before Macbeth descended into basically darkness, but Obi-Wan didn't really see the signs. No one saw the signs, and honestly, Obi-Wan was dealing with like General Grievous and stuff. Like, he was busy. Essentially, no one was checking up on Anakin, not even his wife. In Revenge of the Sith, Padmé and Anakin are talking, and he tells her that he found a way to save her. And she says something to the effect of, "That's what's been bothering you?" And I found that hilarious, kind of, because Padmé is basically clueless to the fact that her husband is becoming a murderer. The images of her dying in childbirth have been bothering him throughout, like, most of Revenge of the Sith. And it's a part of what sent him to the dark side in the first place. And she's like, "That's what's been bothering you?" I don't know, I just found that a bit funny. I have some comments on Padmé and her character later. Not bad ones necessarily, just more later. Moving on to the latter half of this video, I'm going to be focusing on Revenge of the Sith and the similarities that I found in that movie. I already mentioned Anakin and Macbeth's arrogance, but I just want to say that Anakin knew about the prophecy of the Chosen One, and he knew that he was supposed to be the Chosen One. Personally, I don't think that the Jedi should have told him about the prophecy, because that just encouraged him to think that he was like the greatest thing ever, and it made him a bit arrogant, it made him a bit cocky. You know, he didn't like that people treated him like he was so young, but he was really young. Even if he had a lot of experience and was super brave and stuff, like, he still needed more experience. And in much the same way that the prophecies made Anakin a bit arrogant, they did the same to Macbeth. His prophecies made him feel super invincible. But despite both characters' arrogant trait, they are both insecure. Macbeth was hesitant to kill the king. He wanted the power, but he also was a mess when it came to killing the king. He even left the incident, if I remember correctly, with blood on his hands. Like, sir. When taking that scene into account in comparison to Anakin, I believed them to be very different in at least that aspect of their characters, because Anakin is not afraid to carry through with his actions, and he does it swiftly and effectively. Like Padmé says, there's still a bit of good in him, so there is a part of Anakin, even if it's not visible, that knows what he's doing is wrong, which means he's not completely comfortable with himself, which is by definition an insecurity. Anakin's insecurity goes beyond feeling unsure of what he's doing under Palpatine. I talked about Anakin's insecurity and where the insecurity comes from in my movie commentary. What I didn't say is that I think that Anakin is very lonely. He had Padmé and she brought him a lot of joy, and he was so afraid of losing the one person he truly cared about, so much so that it sent him to the dark side. I have my theory of Padmé being sort of a motherly figure to Anakin, not in a way that she's a mother to him, not in a way that she's like his mom. I don't think that Anakin saw Padmé as his mom, like Shmi. You know, I don't think Padmé's like Shmi for him. But what I think happened is that Padmé was 5 years older than him. When Anakin left his mom, Padmé was there to comfort him, and Anakin says that she was on his mind for 10 years as he grew up. I think that Padmé's kindness, her warmth, and her leadership had an impact on Anakin, and it subconsciously reminded him of the role that he needed and wanted in his life. To move on from Macbeth a little bit, I equated this relationship to Victor Frankenstein's relationship with Elizabeth. There's differences, But in the novel Frankenstein by Mary Shelley, Elizabeth is the adopted sister of Victor. She was taken in when Victor's mother was still alive, but when his mother dies, Elizabeth becomes a substitute mother. Mary Shelley made this very clear because Victor has a dream of Elizabeth. He kisses her, but she dies, and then she morphs into his mother. Victor yearned for the love of his dead mother, and in the same way, Anakin yearned for a mom, just a motherly figure, some sort of soft presence and nurturing presence. When I read Macbeth in high school, I don't recall talking about Macbeth's issue with impotency. We could have, but I don't remember. Most of the characters in the play have children. King Duncan has his sons, Macduff has a family, Banquo has a son. Fatherhood is a recurring theme and a rather significant one. A king can often be seen as the father of the city, state, realm that he presides over. Macbeth and Lady Macbeth have intensely strong feelings about Macbeth becoming king. Obviously they want power, you become king, you get power, but their strong feelings regarding becoming king and queen point to a larger issue within the play that hovers over each scene. Macbeth's inability to produce children is a source of contention for the couple, and Macbeth becoming king would be his way of proving to his wife that he's manly. Like, what's more manly than being the father to a nation of people? So you may be wondering how it can be assumed that the reason the couple is childless is because of Macbeth and not Lady Macbeth. Well, before I begin, I'm merely interpreting a text that was written by a man who lived hundreds of years ago. This was the 16th and 17th centuries, and people had the idea that everyone had their roles to fulfill. This bit of evidence is not super definitive, but I'm presenting it because I pointed it out in a research paper and I got a good grade on the research paper, so I'm still rolling with this analysis. This is where we learn the most about Lady Macbeth's character. In her soliloquy, she says, "Unsex me here and fill me from the crown to the toe top full of direst cruelty. Make thick my blood." So Lady Macbeth is basically saying that if she could, she would kill King Duncan herself. She doesn't really trust that Macbeth is man enough to do it, but she thinks that it's still something that a man should do. Earlier in the scene, Lady Macbeth says, "Glamis thou art and Cawdor, and shalt be what thou art promised. Yet do I fear thy nature, it is too full of the milk of human kindness." So Lady Macbeth is saying that Macbeth is too kind to commit murder of an innocent person. But if you read that again, specifically the line, "It is too full of the milk of human kindness," full of the milk, too full of the milk, has undertones that I believe refers to Macbeth's impotence. He's full of milk, i.e. semen. I think milk can be equated to semen, and therefore his kindness is what Lady Macbeth perceives and equates with cowardice because he can't get the milk out. He's too full of the milk. You know what I mean? Does that make sense? Lady Macbeth says, "I have given suck and know how tender 'tis to love the babe that milks me." So this line seems to imply that Lady Macbeth has had a child at some point. We don't know what happened with the child, but it's very clearly not Macbeth's child. So if that's the case, then that means that Lady Macbeth can have children. Macbeth appears in the play surrounded variously by the language of sexual insufficiency and inadequacy and masturbatory excess. So I already gave some examples of this kind of, but we're going to go further and give kind of just a list, sort of. Macbeth is an intensely emotional play, but Scene 3 of Act 2 introduces the porter who provides some comedic relief, but he also provides some insight into Macbeth's issue. So the characters Macduff and Lennox enter the scene. The porter says, "Drink, sir, is a great provoker of three things. It," drink, alcohol, "provokes the desire, but it takes away the performance. It provokes the desire to have sex, but the inability to perform." And then he also says, "makes him stand to and not stand to." And I think that's pretty self-explanatory. I don't think I need to further describe. Act 3, Scene 1, Macbeth speaks about his barren scepter and his gripe. This is what Barmazel means when she says, when she talks about masturbatory excess. He also talks about, he says, "Upon my head they placed a fruitless crown," so he's acknowledging the fact that Okay, wait. Roll it back. Let's roll it back. So he's talking about they, the witches. They, the witches, hail to him, Banquo, father to a line of kings. Upon my head they placed a fruitless crown. So Macbeth is acknowledging the fact that he is not going to produce a line of kings. Again, like I mentioned, the scepter, Baron scepter, but the symbolism of a phallic scepter appears again, but in the mirror when I mentioned the line of processions, like that apparition. In that same scene, Macbeth, he says that twofold balls and treble scepters carry. The scepter, twofold balls, well, more phallic imagery. But again, the scene in the visual of all of Banquo's descendants is to mock Macbeth's inability to produce heirs. There's possibly more evidence, but I'm done for now. I brought up this idea in my Star Wars commentary, and I just wanted to make sure that I clarified. Of course, you can disagree, but I think that there's really like a compelling argument there. I'm curious to know what other people think. So basically, in conclusion to this theory, the theme of fatherhood and Macbeth's impotence just further highlights his inability to be king. King Duncan was a father, literally, to his sons, but he was also a father to his subjects, and for all intents and purposes, Duncan seems like he was a good king. Macbeth isn't a father, and he hasn't shown to be fatherly in any way, so ultimately he cannot fulfill that fatherly, kingly role that Duncan once held. Anakin had showed a propensity for recklessness and not really wanting to listen in Attack of the Clones, but that was all harmless. It was when he slaughtered the Sand People that we see that what he's kind of capable of, I guess. It isn't until Revenge of the Sith that Anakin's mind is fully twisted, and successfully so by Palpatine, who I'm assuming put the images of Padmé dying into his head. But Anakin ends up being controlled by Palpatine. He has a very warped worldview. Both Anakin and Macbeth are people who were encouraged to do evil things because someone else pushed them to do those things. For Anakin, this person is Palpatine, and for Macbeth, this person is Lady Macbeth. Both Palpatine and Lady Macbeth want power. Palpatine had access to Anakin from a young age, and he basically groomed him to be dutiful to him and to trust him. Lady Macbeth is in her husband's ear and has him convinced that committing regicide is the thing that needs to be done, and she does this by goading him about his masculinity. Once Macbeth becomes king, he becomes threatened by people, he's paranoid, his mental health really takes a dive after he kills King Duncan, and again, similarly, once Anakin pledges himself essentially to Palpatine, he's not the same person anymore. Anakin's murder of the younglings is similar to when Macbeth kills Macduff's family. Both of the characters' actions are after they've truly spiraled and allowed the evil people in their lives into their heads. The slight difference is that Lady Macbeth does seem to have feelings, because at first it seems like she didn't, until Macbeth orders the death of Macduff's family. Then after that, she seems to, it weighs heavily on her mind. That tells us that she's capable of some compassion. On the other hand, Palpatine is just completely evil. So since we're talking about Lady Macbeth, I wanted to mainly contrast the two wives of our tragic heroes. They really have no similarities other than both being wives and dying at some point in the story, mainly towards the end of the story. Lady Macbeth supports her husband's terrible actions and Padmé doesn't. She's a bit oblivious. Padmé, she's a bit oblivious in the beginning, but once she realizes Anakin has gone down a horrible path, she's pretty disturbed by the things that he's done. Padmé is I like her. I think she's a good character. I do feel like she got downgraded a bit by the end of the story, by the third movie, to just kind of being barefoot and pregnant. She went from the first movie to being to having a very active role to being kind of passive by episode 3. She did have a big belly though, so there's only so much you can do when you're about to pop, you know what I mean? I wouldn't know, I've never been pregnant, I don't know what you can and can't do. But I do wish she at least recognized quicker that Anakin was spiraling, but perhaps she was just in denial, I don't know. But I like Padmé. I like her leadership skills. She's intelligent. She's not a damsel. She's very capable of taking care of herself, but at the same time she's caring and she's kind. Sometimes when female characters are in a position to be a strong female character, they're made out to be super hard or tough, as if a person can't be strong and soft and gentle at the same time. This has nothing to do with Star Wars. That's why I love Wonder Woman. I love her character so much. I love that she's like this badass warrior that does not hesitate to kill people, but she'll be diplomatic at first. She'll try, but if she has to, you know, lop your head off with her sword, she will do it. In comparison, Lady Macbeth is violent and ambitious, and Shakespeare's intention with making Lady Macbeth violent and ambitious was to have her behave in a way that was unexpected for a woman of that time. Lady Macbeth thinks that if she could shed her womanliness, then she could commit a violent act, because if she's not a woman, then she's no longer sensitive to her emotions. Obviously, that's not how that works. Emotions are not gendered, but this idea that there is a disparity in emotions and sensitivity is challenged actually by Macbeth's character, because he's hesitant to kill Duncan. He's like a soldier, a warrior. He is capable of doing, you know, a lot of things in battle, but there's something about killing just a sleeping innocent person that bothers him, understandably. But Macbeth is hesitant to kill King Duncan, and according to Lady Macbeth, because he's a man, it should come easily for him, but it doesn't. This idea is also challenged by Macduff in Act 4, Scene 3. After his wife and children are killed, Macduff is obviously upset, and Malcolm, King Duncan's son and heir to the throne, tells him to dispute it like a man. Yeah, so my wife and my child died, but I'm just gonna, like, you know, dispute it like a man. I didn't have to hit myself so hard. These eyes are dry. There's too many Mac names. Macduff, Macbeth. Macduff, in response, says, "But I must also feel it as a man. Men, you can cry. Women, you can cry. He, she, they. It's okay to cry. We can all cry." But anyway, I don't have much of a conclusion, because I feel like if I had a conclusion, I would just be rehashing everything I just said. Can't think of any more similarities or differences. If you have any, please feel free to let me know. I hope this wasn't too all over the place. This is only my second video doing something like this, where I'm talking about a topic that I chose, that I researched. Shakespeare was a lot to tackle. It's not necessarily, like, Shakespeare's tragedies are complex, but they're not necessarily hard. But it takes, like, you have to think a little bit harder, especially because of the language. In high school, I used to think that Shakespeare was super difficult. I wasn't super excited about having to read his stuff, but the way that Shakespeare is taught is wrong. The sonnets are one thing, but the plays, you have to see them. Like, you have to watch them. For my Shakespeare studies class, when we had to read the plays, rather than reading them, I either listened to an audiobook or I found the play on YouTube and I watched it for free. I watched Hamlet and Macbeth. It's a play. Like, being able to see the actors acting it out, it's really, really helpful, because even if you don't necessarily understand everything that they're saying, because the words are very different, the way that the tone of the actors or the facial expressions, like, it's very helpful. That would be my tip when it comes to tackling Shakespeare. The language is different. Technically, it is modern English. It's not Old English like some people think it is. This, I can put it here or here somewhere, but Old English is literally like, it's almost another language. I took history of the English language, and Old English is so difficult. It's so difficult. I'm not sure what topic to cover next. It is Leo season. I was thinking about, like, Lion King maybe, and, you know, Lion King was kind of inspired by Hamlet, but there's not that many similarities. Just the fact that Simba leaves and then comes back, and then the fact that the uncle killed the father. But really, other than that, there's not a lot of similarities. I don't know if I want to make, like, a big thing or just watch The Lion King. I don't know. I don't always have to do, like, watch a movie and then do a video like this. It just so happens it's like that's how my last couple of videos were. So I don't know. But that's it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. Again, don't forget to like and subscribe, and goodbye.